Homeschool Mom. I hope you're having a good day. We're going to be chatting with Diane Geerlinks from Geerlinks Education. She's across the country. She's a graduated homeschool mom of 5 kids. And in fact, she's got grandkids at present. And she is an incredible resource to the homeschool community, most definitely for those who have children with challenges like ADHD, dyslexia, any learning challenges. She's a fabulous resource that you would want to know. And I'm going to invite her to join me. So if you have any questions, hey, Diane, we did that
Hello.
virtually. That was so smooth, except for my dog starting to bark in the background as I'm going live.
Coffee.
Water, excellent. Let's have coffee.
It's a coffee chat.
It's a coffee chat. If I drink coffee right now, I'm not sleeping tonight. So my daughter just bought me water. She bought me a water bottle. So I'm like, I'll use, and it's on brand. This is like my color and everything. So nice. So nice to see you.
Nice to see you as always.
Yeah, this is, it's always tricky to coordinate these times, but I absolutely love this opportunity to talk with different people who are serving in the homeschool community. And also, it's just, being around the water cooler.
Exactly, even though it's across the country, as you said.
Exactly.
Oh, so fun.
So we're going to be chatting about, various possibilities. If anybody has any questions about any learning challenges and how to address them, throw them in the comment section below. I know I have questions frequently around ADHD, autism, sometimes dyslexia, but today we're going to focus on the discussion of ADHD symptoms, strategies, solutions, or at least a plan, an action plan to address all that.
We're going to do it all, right? In this little chat.
Let's do it. And let's hope that the dog doesn't keep barking.
I'm not hearing him, so that's great.
You will if she barks. She's a large guardian dog, so everyone hears her. Yeah. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, ADHD is more known, I would say, in the last probably decade even. I mean, we had heard of it, but recently, I think, in the last decade, more and more people are aware of it.
Yeah.
I think people even flippantly say, oh, that's my ADHD, even though they've never been diagnosed.
Yeah.
I sometimes even say, oh, that's my ADHD tendencies about myself, which really isn't fair, because for people that really have ADHD, that's a little bit difficult for them.
Yeah.
But certainly the awareness is there, and I think that's huge for us all to realize and understand and learn, so that we can help each other and help kiddos. I have a lot of homeschool moms that when they call me will say, this is me. I was never diagnosed, but I've had this. And now as an adult, there's lots of adults getting diagnosed because they're like, I should have known this. This would have helped me understand why I was the way I was. So I acted the way I acted.
Yeah.
So it is a well talked about situation, I think. And I think it's good for us to know and understand ADHD as a condition, perhaps, and especially look for it as we watch our kiddos. Just because a kid's moving a lot doesn't necessarily mean they have ADHD.
Yes.
We've also changed our names. We used to just call it ADHD, ADD, or ADHD. And so people will say, well, I don't have ADHD, I have the ADD part. Because my kid doesn't have it because they're not hyperactive.
Right.
However, the names and the diagnosis has changed so that it's all ADHD. Yeah. But it's either inattentive or hyperactive.
Right.
And sometimes I think the hyperactive we understand more. It's the inattentive that can surprise us in our
Yeah.
kiddos.
Yes, because how could we misperceive an inattentive ADHD presentation?
Yeah, I think that an inattentive child that has ADHD, can't pay attention to the details.
Right.
That, they have trouble keeping their sustaining attention. So they can get attended, but they can't keep it long. Or they have trouble with the follow through, or they might just be a little bit like lackadaisical or a little like up, not really following. They're not hyper, so they're just kind of quiet over there. But they're really distracted. They may not be able to organize or find things, or, they're not appearing to listen when you're like, just listen to me.
Right.
So those are some of the symptoms, I would say, the things that we might see when a child has ADHD, the inattentive type.
Right.
Now, of course, none of this is just for observation on our part. It's when the diagnosis comes that they may, the psychologist will diagnose it and say ADHD inattentive or ADHD hyperactive or ADHD combined type, because they might have both.
I've heard that sometimes it goes less noticed or diagnosed in girls. And of course, this is a generalization, but actually statistics bear out that this is the case, that girls are less likely to be diagnosed because they are more likely to present as inattentive than hyperactive.
100%. And
Yeah.
they, the girls are just sweet and quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And those sweet and quiet girls kind of get forgotten. And they may look like, oh, they're no trouble, like they're no trouble in class. They're no trouble. They just, they're just there, but their work isn't getting done, and they're feeling like they are drowning, kind of like treading water.
So if we are homeschool parents, what might we confuse that ADHD inattentive presentation with? What might we assume it is, but it isn't?
Oh, it could just look like they weren't listening. Like I said, they don't want to learn. They don't want to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
They're not trying hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
They would just try, but we talked about attention to detail. So, they lose everything and they don't remember where they put it. All of those things could be ADHD and attentive. And so as a homeschooler, you're just like trying to get this kid out the door. And how could you leave your boot? Or like that just seems ridiculous, but they just can't, they can't hold it all the pieces together. And so, I know of adults women who have had ADHD and lived their whole lives just feeling like they could never quite get it together.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, not that all of us moms don't feel that.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, how do you differentiate between an ADHD inattentive approach or presentation versus just normal child development? Because they just don't always, follow through either, even if they're not diagnosed.
Truthfully, true. And I think that's the conundrum, and we don't always know. You have to look at, how often this happens. Right? And it's happening in all situations. It's
Yeah.
not like, one time I forgot something. Oh, you must be ADHD. I remember myself as a homeschool mom, for a long time, I'd miss chiropractor appointments. I didn't have an iPhone to put it in or a beeper to buzz me.
Yeah.
So one time, one of my kids said, somehow I think you need to write this down to remember. And, that might look like an ADHD person that can't quite get it together, or because they can't hold it all, or it could just be a busy homeschool mom that can't hold it all.
Yeah, because it's a lot.
But there's a lot for us as moms to hold. So, yeah, I would say, we aren't the diagnosers. Right. But we can certainly look at the characteristics and then be able to say, okay, something's going on with my child. This probably isn't them just doing this to bug me. And sometimes I think as parents, we're just thinking they're just doing that kiddo. Like they just need to pay attention. And
Right.
paying attention, yes, we want them to pay attention. And when I've done lessons or teachings to parents on, focus and attention, everyone's signing up like all my kids have trouble with this.
Exactly.
Right? But it is really hard for them to pay attention. And so it's difficult to throw that away to say, well, this child just should try harder when really it is really hard for them to try. Organization is probably the most difficult piece for ADHD. And whether they're inattentive or hyperactive, impulsive, those executive functions that are really prefrontal cortex of the brain are really difficult for them.
So it's interesting when we're speaking about this, because that has been my experience when my oldest was much younger. Like she got an ADHD diagnosis in her first year of university. And for sure, for a very long time, I just misperceived it as being impulsive and resistant. And so I didn't read it right. Yeah, so I can identify
And
with
you
that.
managed, so I guess I want to say, like, I don't know, maybe you feel like, shoot, I should have got her diagnosed earlier.
I think it would have benefited her. I do actually. Yeah. Except I was very much of the persuasion of do it with freedom. We can figure these things out ourselves. And also, she's just flying under the radar because she is so dang smart. So
Right.
that's the challenge.
Yes. And
And
that's
a couple more kids.
so true. That is so true. So many of these kids are dang smart.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have this disability, if you want to even call it, that kind of hangs on them to say, but I have this ADHD and I can't show what I know. I can't show how smart I am sometimes because I can't get it down on paper. I can't get myself organized. I can't.
Yeah.
So those pieces can become very difficult.
There was a mom that I was a homeschool mom who's also a certified life coach who is diagnosed with ADHD herself. And she was having a chat with me here in the coffee chat a few weeks ago and was sharing that sometimes, I forget her exact words, but her goal is to not have it as a perception of this is necessarily a bad thing or a negative thing, but maybe it's even a superpower in certain ways. And that's for sure. Because when they buckle down and they want to do something, watch out, world, they're going to do it.
Right. And that shows us that we can see it in one way or another way.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's so true. It is their superpower. And the truth is that many of the movers and shakers that we know and that even as homeschoolers we look at to say, well, they did it. Look at all the people in history. Einstein, I mean, go on and on and on.
Yeah.
They were homeschooled. They probably all had ADHD. There is the movers and the shakers, like Jobs, I believe he talks about it. Like there's these people who are, build businesses, who are out of the box thinkers, are these ADHD kiddos. So we don't want to squash it. We want to say it is a superpower.
Two thoughts I've had is, Whitney, thank you for sharing that. She said it affects self-esteem so deeply for these kids. And that is part of the big problem here, is when we don't understand our kids well, which truly is a challenge for all of us because they don't know themselves well. And so even if they were able to give us the words about who they are and what they're about, and assuming we were listening to all of that and also able to pay attention to that, that would make it easier, but that's not usually our experience. But then also what you're just speaking to about being a mover and a shaker and a thinking outside of the box kind of person, I kind of think that's me, if I'm being straight. And that's not to laud me as much as that is how I focus or how I engage. And yet I have a really hard time showing up on time too. You should see the back end to how I function with appointments. I double check, triple check, just like I on pediatrics back 20 years ago, checking for medication dosages for kids.
Yeah.
I am double, triple checking that stuff, and I write stuff down like this. But still, there are times where I miss things because I have a really, really hard time not being fully present. I have a really, really hard time thinking about the next thing. I'm very able to be present. And so I've thought sometimes maybe that's ADHD, but then from my experience, I go, but you know what makes more sense is that it's some sort of trauma thing, because that definitely fits my story. But then I think, if you can follow me, everybody.
You sound like the person on Fiddler on the Roof. But then I think.
I love that. My husband's going to love you said that. But then I think, well, trauma and ADHD, maybe there's actually a source, or maybe there is a common source. And I know there's discussion about that right now. So yeah, I'll just leave that on the table.
Well, and that's true. I think it takes a certain, a mover and a shaker. Again, like I said, I personally can have some ADHD symptoms. I don't think, be diagnosed as having ADHD. But these symptoms help me to understand other people who also struggle with organization or getting things and how they have to make their schedules, etc. But now let's talk about those kids that really need it.
Okay.
That are like, you, the parent, have to be their executive function. And that is frustrating. When you have a child with ADHD, it means you have to be one step ahead of them constantly. Right. Look at me. Are you looking at me? This is what I need you to do. Tell me again. What do I need you to do? Because they are, they're with you. You've given them an instruction, and they even might have looked at you, but it didn't go in. And so now they're off. And then they're all upset when you, scold them because they wanted to please you.
Yeah.
But their mind was really still in this conversation here that somebody had with them about how that worked, and maybe they were unscrewing something. And so they're thinking that while you're talking, and to do both at the same time is not possible.
Right. Yeah. So then really, I think this is a twofold discussion, because one is how do you actually help your child? But I also know from my perspective and where I focus, us really understanding ourselves, how we function, and also how we might project our emotional frustrations onto our child when they are doing that. Present, but not present.
Right. It takes, I have a daughter who's dealing with this and talking to me about her child, because as you said, I have grandchildren. And so like, it's so much work. Like that you send them off somewhere and they're probably not going to come back with that coat.
That's
but they need a coat right now. And so trying to help them develop a strategy. So now you as a mom who may or may not have ADHD because it's your child, and genes are strong, you have to come up with an idea to help them strategize. How are you going to remember your coat? Can you picture this? When you get back in the car, when you sit down and put your seatbelt on, when you come back home with so-and-so, what are the two things you have to think about?
Right.
I have to think about, I have to think about coat, water bottle. Okay, what are the two things? As soon as you sit down in the car and your seatbelt goes on, so you've kind of rehearsed it with them. What were the two things? Then when they come home, you say, how did you do? And what you're doing is giving them strategies for managing their lives forever.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
because that's what they need, is they're going to live with this forever. And so you're giving them these tools to say, what do I need to do?
So practically, when you're engaging them, in a subject area. Say you're sitting down at the kitchen table and you're pulling out whatever activities that are your formal learning activities. And I'm guessing they're not necessarily going, great, let's sit down or let's pay attention. How do you address those moments?
Yeah, I think, depending on your child, of course, but you're gonna have to hook them in. So you're right. They're bored easily.
Mm-hmm.
They're, Dr. Ned Hallowell, who writes Driven to Distraction,
Yeah.
Delivered from Distraction, right? He's big on ADHD. He'll say, as far as I'm concerned, people with ADHD, actually, it should be called attention surplus disorder.
Mm.
Because they actually have a lot of attention. It's just really hard to tone it into this. They're very bored because they need a lot of like mover and shaker activities happening in order to keep them focused.
So, assuming that you don't just have a singleton, because wouldn't it just be so much simpler?
Or something, yes.
And I think the homeschool industry average is like 4, just saying.
Right.
Yeah, I
So
know.
you may have to get them. So there's a few things. One is, they're the ones that you're going to go get this, go get that, because they need to move. And
Yeah.
people with ADHD often need to move. They're shaking their leg, they're moving back and forth. They're the ones that you're like, just sit down to pay attention. And they're like, I am paying attention.
Yeah.
Right? So one is you have to have enough novelty, something new, because
Yeah.
the same book every day is not going to work so well for them.
Right. Yeah. Or do you remember those big, what are those balls? They're in gyms. In fact, we had one until last year and it deflated. But those big balls that you exercise on.
Yes. Yeah.
And, or you'd labor on, because I labored on.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe kids are bouncing on them as you're doing certain things.
Yeah, 100%. The other thing for ADHD that's really important is movement, and more movement. And even so much as exercise, they need exercise. They don't just need to move on balls and move to, but they must exercise. And it's the exercise that actually is bringing oxygen to their brain so that they can sit and focus.
Right.
So Dr. Ratey, Ratey, has written books on this and he himself has ADHD. And so lots of talk, he just talks about what if exercise was the first stop instead of medicine, right? Because I'm not saying there's not a time, Dr. Hallowell and Dr. Ratey wrote the book ADHD 2.0,
Mm-hmm.
and they together have really talking there beautifully about the importance of medication when it's needed and why it's so important. And I think that's important to know. But exercise, as one of the moms is saying now in the chat, but brings the dopamine up for the brain. So let's make that happen. And some, Dr. Ratty's book, he had everybody run around he would send them out, his whole class, like first thing in the morning, they ran the mile.
Wow.
That was how they geared up to be able to sit and learn. And that helped their brain. Their scores went way up. So, exercise is a very important part for the brain, and especially for kids with ADHD.
Yeah, maybe because you are a mom of a kid with ADHD, you actually want to join them. So then you can burn out your tension, increase your dopamine, so you can be ready with them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So the ADHD piece of, I think, I would say, someone else talked about this, their self-esteem. I would say, ADHD, it can feel like they can't quite ever keep up. And I think that for some, I can't quite get it together makes their self-esteem go down. So being able to encourage them to be able to find, that's why I think the identification in younger years is so important.
Yes.
Right?
And
Because
maybe,
then we can help them.
and maybe losing the stigma around it as well. Like I know I mean, I know that different people will speak differently about this, but no matter what's going on in our brains, whatever mental health stigmas that we have, or because some people won't call this a mental health challenge, but
Yeah,
whoever, however you characterize it,
right.
we could just take away the stigma around anything like that so that we don't feel like we're locked in to a label, really.
Right. Right. We could use anything that we're labeled with as a crutch.
Yeah,
Or we can say, well, I know I have ADHD, therefore I have to have a calendar. I cannot do without it.
yeah,
Right? I've known people who say, I was going to pick up my phone, but I'm speaking it. Who use their iPhone change their life because now they can have notifications and buzzers and they can put they can get themselves organized. And that's the key skill, I think, that we as homeschool parents have the opportunity to give our child.
yeah,
What environment is best for you to learn in? Oh, it
yeah.
doesn't work for you when we have 4 children and the toddler, crying while we're trying to do this. Okay, so how do we do this differently so that
Yeah.
you can focus?
That's exactly my experience. First of all, I had a reel go viral, and it's like a week ago, and I still haven't turned off the notifications, making me batty. So I really do that after this. But so at a certain point, it's not actually effective if they're always dinging. Um,
Uh-huh.
but then the other thought is that, you're just speaking about how to address, or like, what homeschool environment, what homeschool method do you choose in order to approach that child? And without having had a diagnosis myself, I knew it wasn't working to do what I was doing. So that's why when John Holt fell into my lap at a library, literally, they
Uh-huh.
always, whatever book falls into my lap is a book that was meant to be.
Okay.
So he introduced me to unschooling, this 30-year teaching veteran, and it really shifted how I was approaching everything. I sat her down in a Starbucks and I said, we will never do homeschool again. And so we did 6 months later because I had other kids.
Right. And so that I love it that I'm familiar with John Holt too, but that helped you get off this track to say, I have to do something different. And
Yeah.
so, okay, I'm not going way back there for that long, but I am going to meander to
Yeah.
find a way that works for us and our children.
Yeah, exactly. And it didn't stay static. But mostly, I would say the things that I've noticed her do, even in university, still reflects how, and I probably shouldn't speak to all of her story, but I can see how she's approaching it is very similar to how I started her education way back. Or not started it. What I started was a classical homeschool in my home. And I said, here's our private school. Let's go.
Yeah, yeah. And then
And
that changed.
it had to change.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't functional.
Mm-hmm. When I've here's some good, when you think about an ADHD person, and I have some quotes here that were given to me or that I've read from people who have ADHD, and it says, look, what does it feel like? Tell me what it feels like. Because we have to try to figure out what it feels like for them. So
Yeah.
someone said, it feels like my brain is understeering. So they're, moving along, but we're not quite, the steering is off. I
Ah,
can't quite get there. It feels like my brain is my computer with really low RAM, not enough memory. Right? It feels like my brain is a browser with too many tabs opened.
that is literally my computer right now.
And that might be their computer too,
Yeah.
because they're used to so many things going on at once. Right? But it's hard to pick which is the most important to focus on. And so, with your ADHD child, you're going to have to help, like I said, you have to be that executive function. So you have to help them with planning, with organizing, let's color code this. How can I help you get independent? Because I think that's the best thing we can give to our homeschool kids that have ADHD is a system
Yeah.
that works for them. And it sounds like you did give that to your daughter with or without the diagnosis, because she can, she's managing and she is following some of the same strategies that you taught her.
Yeah, it was a natural process. And I don't know that I really figured it out in all the different ways. I do remember, I have to say this, that you and I had this conversation on podcast like 3 years ago. And I remember you really compelling me to reconsider this notion that I got from better late than early, than more, that especially in the homeschool community, we don't want to feel pressured to make our children learn to read and write, because at least this book has encouraged us to allow them to be who they are and to grow and develop as they need to. And I think that has a lot of value, that concept, because the school, the institutional or educational institution approaches everything rather methodically. And so there has to be a certain age you have to do something, then the next stage expects one thing. And we know that that's not consistent with every child. So we have this freedom in our homes to do it our way. And so then I took that energy that I gained from that book and said, okay, I don't need to, force feed anybody anything at a specific stage. And that was my natural tendency. And it still is my default setting with homeschool moms, to be like, okay, let's not panic that they haven't figured out how to read at 5. And also, if you have that spider sense that something's not right here, which I learned as a pediatric nurse too, that when mom thinks something's up, something's probably up. So trust it and go do something with it, like go talk to Diane.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say we're all individual and we learn at our own pace. It's just not fair to say, therefore we'll wait till they're 12 before they start because they're not really interested in reading. When reading is around letters and script and words are all around us every day in our culture, they will naturally start to learn or start to wonder. And
Yeah.
so, if they aren't picking it up, after 1 year, fine. They're 5, they're 6. But if they're still not picking it up and they're 7, we need to think about, well, why? Have we progressed? And so saying that, there could be ADHD. That's even different than ADHD, right? Because ADHD kind of is these characteristics, this ability, this executive function area struggle. If they are struggling with reading, that's not likely from their ADHD. That could be a learning challenge of some sort, or, we'll call it, I think the diagnosis is specific learning disorder in reading or writing or math, right? So any of those could be in a combination with ADHD.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think, the biggest piece to me is movement
Yeah.
and allowing them to move, because they really need it, and exercise. And the thing is, some of these kids, especially the inattentive, aren't movers and shakers. They're like, they sometimes don't even really want to move.
Right.
So that's a little tricky, because we need some dopamine. We need some oxygen to their brain for them to learn.
So would you say you see a certain age group more typically, or you see a gender more specifically, or who do you normally see?
You mean in my practice or with ADHD?
Yeah, in the element of ADHD in your practice, who are you more likely to see, and like similar, what ages?
We see kids from age 7 to 15, I would say, is our average age.
Yeah.
Because parents, some will know, I'm getting more calls from 5 and 6 year old parents of 5 and 6 year olds, because that are homeschooling see, like, I've tried, they still can't, and they don't know their colors, they don't know their letters. What should I be looking for? But generally it's like 10 and 12 when people start to go, oh my goodness, something's going on.
Okay.
Obviously, the research is telling us early intervention is best, and they keep telling us. So we know that you don't want to wait when there's a learning difficulty, too long, because you're missing time.
Right. Yeah.
Without intervention. Now, as a homeschool mom, you are doing it. You're
Yeah.
homeschooling, you're giving them lots. But there is a time and a place, I think, to have some outside support to say, how do I do this better?
So what do you think homeschool parents can do?
I think that, they need explicit instructions. So as much as I want to say, let them play and let them learn through the living of life, and that is my passion. I
Yeah.
also say, but we do teaching reading, and every research out right now is showing us takes explicit instruction. So we need to sit them down at some point to say, we might have to stand up and talk about letters and make the shape with our bodies, but we do need explicit instruction. And so I would say, you need a curriculum that can follow it, that you can follow, that actually is going to teach them the components of reading.
So where would people access you, or what is your availability for homeschool moms? How would they go about connecting with you?
Yeah, there's a few different ways. My website has, contact me and I can call you. And so I do consultations through that. But I also have a homeschool Facebook group. It's called Homeschooling Your Unique Learner. And so I have, 1,000 families across Canada, some US, that are joining us there for conversation. And I have a membership. So I have a smaller membership group where parents, I have videos and teaching, and so some people will sign up to get more support there as well. So yeah, I'm always looking for ways to support homeschool families. After lots of years of homeschooling myself, it continues to be my passion, and now I get to watch and support my kids who are homeschooling.
I love
as
that.
they go along.
When one of my girls recently said she's not anywhere near having kids, I don't think, but she said she is thinking she'll homeschool. I was like, oh, that's so
Yeah, and there's going to be different choices, and
yeah.
that's totally great. Every family has to figure out what's going to work for them.
Yeah.
And so I'm good with that. I'm just here to say, your kids are still my grandchildren, and so I want to support however I can.
Yeah. Beautiful. A
One
beautiful.
of them, I do grammar school on video across the miles. So
What do you do? Grandma, love that.
yeah, I really help with spelling and reading. Some of the things that mom's saying, I could use some support in this. So I'm like, well, here I am. What can I do?
Cool. What a beautiful memory for your kids, really, your grandkids too.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much for being here. Do you have any last words of encouragement for the homeschool mom who's either challenged with ADHD or also has kids that have or might have ADHD?
Yeah, it's not easy. That's my word of encouragement. And because sometimes I think we just need to address it and say, this is hard.
Yeah,
Like, it is frustrating to have to tell your kid, these are the 3 things I need you to do this morning. And then you come back and you haven't even done one.
yeah,
Just make my life a little easier.
yeah,
And so, sometimes I'll say, there's many, many tips, but, write it down on a list,
yeah.
point to the list. Let the list be the nag, not you.
Did that?
Right? To
Yeah,
say, what do I need to make my life easier so I can manage and realize that this child's not purposely
hmm,
ignoring you or going against you. Not that they never do, because children are children, but that really it's a real thing that's hard for them to remember. And so we have to come up with strategies to help them. And so I just encourage you to take note of your child and develop that relationship with them, because in the end it's relationship. And if you're frustrated all day because they haven't, they're not doing what you ask, and they've forgotten their pencil, and all these things all day long, that can be really hard on you and on them.
Yeah, it's a lot for sure.
It's a lot. And that's why I say parenting's hard
Yep.
and homeschooling is not easy. Um, it's worth it, but
Yeah.
but it's hard work. And I just want to encourage parents to say, you can do it. It's
Absolutely.
hard work, but the alternative isn't easy either. And having them be in school and remember to take home their stuff is not the answer, because that would even be harder.
Or buy a lot of jackets.
Or buy a lot of jackets.
In my back seat that I'm giving away. Let me know if you're local.
Exactly. Well, it's always a joy to chat with you.
You too. And you're such a wealth of information, especially coming from the perspective of mothering kids and going now grandmothering. And this is what you do all day, is supporting other homeschool families, or really other school families as well, but
Sure.
children, to address the challenges that they're coming against. So I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And if anybody wants to connect with Diane, you can check Geerlinks Education. I'm saying that right. Is that right?
Educational therapy. It's at geerlinkslearning.com.
Geerlinkslearning.com.
Yeah.
Thanks, Diane.
Okay. Bye now.
Talk to you soon.